has set a 2-week deadline to decide if the U.S. will step into the growing conflict between Israel and Iran. The move is already dividing lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Senator Elizabeth Warren says the U.S. should stay out of another war in the Middle East.
The American people did not vote last November to be dragged into one more endless war in the Middle East.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says Trump is allowing for the possibility that talks with Iran could play out. The wife of Minnesota Democratic State Senator John Hoffman is out of the hospital after suffering multiple gunshot wounds in last weekend's assassination attempt. Police say the suspect shot Hoffman in their home before driving to the home of Democratic Representative Melissa Hortman and killing her and her husband. The Los Angeles Dodgers are delaying an announcement on its plans to assist immigrant communities in the LA area. On Thursday, federal agents were denied entry to the Dodger Stadium parking lot. Get BIN News Now 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
The following is a paid program and does not necessarily express the views or opinions of Equity Media, its management, staff, or affiliates of WBOK.
Now, it's the Monitor's Mic with your host, Stella Cement.
Welcome to the Monitor's Mic.
Now, it's the Monitor's Mic with your host, Stella Cement.
Welcome to the Monitor's Mic, where we talk oversight, policing, and you. I'm Stella Cement, your host and the Independent Police Monitor for the City of New Orleans, and with me is Chriselle Williams, our Deputy Police Monitor. This show is your go-to source for discussing policing, law enforcement oversight, and how it all impacts you. From the Office of the Independent Police Monitor, we offer an independent perspective on city government. The Office of the Independent Police Monitor, OIPM, serves as a crucial civilian oversight body for the New Orleans Police Department, the NOPD. We ensure transparency and accountability within the police department by making sure the NOPD follows their policies, abides by the consent decree and the sustainment strategy, and is compliant with all local, state, and federal laws. Our office operates independently from the NOPD and from the federal monitors. What do we do day to day? We take complaints of officer misconduct from the public and from police officers. We review misconduct investigations conducted by the NOPD's Internal Affairs, which is called the Public Integrity Bureau. We're on call 24 hours a day, every day of the year for officer-involved shootings and critical incidents, and we will go to the scene and monitor the force investigation from start to finish. We're advisory members of the Use of Force Review Board and disciplinary hearings. We run the Community Police Mediation Program, and we engage with the community to ensure your voice, opinions, and concerns are heard. We, your hosts, are not police officers, but we are experienced attorneys from the criminal legal field, dedicated to transparency and accountability. We encourage you to call in with your questions, comments, and concerns. While we may not be able to address individual cases, we are committed to following up with you. With that, let's learn more about today's guest. Chriselle?
We're excited to welcome Colin Arnold, Director of the New Orleans Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, also known as NOSEP. NOSEP is a coordinated public safety agency for the City of New Orleans, responsible for administering the city's crisis and consequence management program. It coordinates the city's preparedness for, response to, recovery from, and mitigation against crisis, both natural and man-made, through all hazards planning. Colin has worked for the City of New Orleans for over 27 years, first with the New Orleans Police Department, then operations and emergency management at Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport, and for the last decade in NOSEP, having been appointed director by Mayor LaToya Cantrell in May 2018. Colin also has a private sector experience in transportation management and operations, aviation and rail, and is a licensed commercial pilot and flight instructor with airline experience. He is a veteran of the U.S. Coast Guard, having served on cutters worldwide. Colin is a certified emergency manager, CEM, with the International Association of Emergency Managers, a professional Louisiana emergency manager, LEMP, with the Louisiana Emergency Preparedness Association, as well as a graduate of the National Emergency Management Advanced Academy through the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and FEMA. Colin, we thank you so much for being with us today.
That was a lot. Thank you.
I know.
Stella, Chriselle, great to be here with you, and I'm glad we could put this together.
Yeah, we're so appreciative of you coming in. And sorry, I'm just making sure that we have this posted online so that way people know they can call in with any questions that they might have about your work, your department, and hurricane season, which sadly started on June 1st.
Yes, it did.
Ugh. So just to be clear, Homeland Security and emergency preparedness is different from the police department, right?
That's correct. The Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness in its current state was formed post-Katrina, largely based on a lot of the lessons learned there. The city did have an Office of Emergency Preparedness at City Hall during Katrina, but obviously we learned that there needed to be more investment and more effort put into planning for not just for hurricanes, clearly for hurricanes, but also for major special events and other types of incidents. And that's why we call it all hazards planning, meaning when you plan for one type of incident that may occur, they have a lot of similarities. A lot of times what we say is really the only difference between a hurricane and a major special event is that when that special event is going to occur. So you have a little bit more time to prepare for it. But the preparations and a lot of the things that you actually need for a major incident are similar. And a lot of the relationships that we have, particularly with our city departments, state and federal partners, are the same. It's the same person that you're coordinating with, whether it be a Super Bowl or whether it be Mardi Gras or whether it be flooding or hurricane. The Homeland Security aspect, which I really am happy here to talk to you today about, actually is kind of a side part of what we do that was originally done by the New Orleans Police Department many years ago before Katrina. But my office is on the Homeland Security side is strictly involved with grant funding. We receive a certain amount of money every year for public safety non-disaster grants. And what we can do with that money is work with the police department, the fire department, New Orleans EMS, and others within the public safety realm and kind of best figure out how to develop projects with that money. And we're talking a couple of $1 million a year that we can develop projects to make purchases for those departments so that they can be better ready to respond to disasters and other major incidents. And so many times people are confused with the Homeland Security moniker with the federal government. I get a lot of calls to my office about immigration and other things, and I just want to make clear that the city's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, NOSEP, is primarily responsible for emergency management in the city of New Orleans, and we have no role with the federal government in immigration enforcement or any of those customs enforcement or anything like that.
Wow, you said a lot there. So I just want to make sure that I highlight a couple of those very important points. Very important point one is that before Hurricane Katrina, Homeland Security was done by NOPD, but now Homeland Security is no longer handled by NOPD. So that means, just to be clear, you don't report to Chief Kirkpatrick, the superintendent of police, correct?
I don't. We're peers and we work together very closely, particularly on, again, planning for disasters, special events, and the like. But I do not report to the superintendent.
And you are not considered a law enforcement agency.
We are not a law enforcement agency. We rely on the New Orleans Police Department for their expertise when we're developing plans and measures to respond in any type of security or law enforcement arena.
And the work that you do predominantly around Homeland Security might be in the grant space to ensure that you're able to acquire and purchase things that would help different city departments with preparing for potential emergencies and hazards. It's not necessarily what we know Homeland Security to be on the federal front.
Correct. After September 11th, 2001, the federal government developed what they called the National Preparedness Goals. And it was to make our country more secure from the local government side, state and federal government side, all levels of government, I should say. And so what we do, and Homeland Security is a very broad term, but it does include natural disasters. It does include things like cybersecurity, election security. It does include obviously the public safety aspect, but it's not just the criminal justice system. It's broader than that. And so, we're happy to be in that space where we're able to advance preparedness and the goals of being a safer and more resilient community through what we do. It's just that the law enforcement is not an aspect of that in my office.
Okay.
And so it's an opportunity today to come and just say, we're here for all of the residents of our city, all of our citizens, and I'll leave it at that. That's what we do.
All residents, all citizens, and you are not checking immigration or...
We do not. All
Yes.
of our plans are about saving lives. And so when we talk about things, and we'll probably get into this in a little while, about things like the city assisted evacuation and other things that we may bring together for a hurricane, if it's bad enough where the mayor feels like we need to do a mandatory evacuation, and that's done in conjunction with the state. Anything that we do, we're trying to save lives and get people to safety. And so we don't have any barriers to do that.
Okay. We're going to underscore that a couple different times in the show, just because it's so vital that people understand that you're not checking citizenship to be able to receive these vital life-saving opportunities.
That's correct.
To be able to evacuate, to be able to have shelter when needed. So we just want to make sure that everyone listening understands and shares that information out, that though Homeland Security does mean something very different on the federal front, it does not mean that here in New Orleans.
Correct.
When we are talking about the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness here in New Orleans, we are not talking about the operations of ICE.
That's correct.
And can you clarify just a little bit more about any partnership? Because you mentioned partnerships with federal government. Are you partnering with ICE? Do you partner with ICE?
We don't partner with ICE. There's no information exchange there. Look, we do communicate with federal law enforcement and other federal departments and divisions, and I'd like to keep those relationships. And so, but there's no collaboration or coordination that we perform with any of them in their duties. It's more of, from an intelligence aspect in particular, and to give you an example, ourselves, the New Orleans Police Department, and others coordinate with many of these same federal agencies when we're dealing with human trafficking, particularly during Mardi Gras, major special events, because there's sex trafficking and a lot of different things that go on out there that I think are worthy and noble efforts that they take on, and we want to support that and make sure that that type of activity is either doesn't occur or is pushed out of any event that we're trying to do. So if there's anything that we can do to support that aspect of it, we're willing to help. We maintain those lines of communication. But this is an opportunity today to just, make clear, because I have gotten phone calls. Our office has gotten calls about immigration status and some other things. And that is not what the city's office does in that regard.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah,
And
no worries.
also, I really do appreciate that you also highlighted the human trafficking risk that exists, not just in New Orleans. This is something that happens all over the country and something that is highly concerning, but a place where there might be a partnership or a collaboration with law enforcement or with federal immigration agencies,
Correct.
but from the perspective of stopping human trafficking.
That's right.
And so that is a very different goal than, say, deportation.
It
and we
is.
just want to highlight that for anyone who's listening who might be concerned, because we do receive questions about ICE's involvement in not just NOPD, but in all of our city agencies. We end up receiving a lot of questions just about law enforcement in general.
I can imagine.
Yeah, so it's helpful to clarify that. So while we're clarifying things, are you a political appointee? Like,
I am. I'm. My position as director of NOSEP is an appointed position. It's an unclassified position, meaning that I do serve at the pleasure of the administration. Other than a few years where I went out in the private sector, though, I've worked for the city for 28 years in both classified and unclassified positions. I feel lucky and fortunate that NOSEP is an office that that I think everyone can get behind. Our goal is, our goals are, I think, righteous, where we're trying to really just make the city more prepared, make our city public safety agencies prepared, and make sure that they have what they need to be successful to the greatest extent that we can, to develop plans that are inclusive and make sure that we are addressing the most vulnerable in our community, whether it be through age, through medical conditions, mobility issues, financial constraints. Our goal is to make sure that if the worst comes down, that we're ready to respond and assist to make sure that those folks are have a chance, because typically it's those vulnerable communities that are the most adversely affected by disasters, by major incidents. And so any opportunity we have to get them to where they need to be afterwards, in the aftermath, is something that we're about. So ultimately, at the end of the day, NOSEP is, I think, pretty uncontroversial, what our goals are and what our job is.
well, we'll see about that.
Exactly.
Well, we might end up
Prove me wrong.
Yeah, we might end up asking some questions that might get us into some
Yeah,
topics.
I hear you.
But no, I do agree that y'all are taking on a lot of really important work. Can you frame where your work might be in the city chain of command for people that are unfamiliar? Again, we clarified that you do not report to Chief Kirkpatrick. You do not report to the Chief of Police. Who do you report to?
So NOSEP is actually under the umbrella of the mayor's office, which is somewhat common. Baton Rouge does the same way. They have their mayor's office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. I report to the mayor. I do have a supervisor who is Director John Thomas. Now, he is the Director of Public Safety and Homeland Security. It's a bit broader of a job. So his role is to, he has several departments kind of under his wing. He has the fire department, EMS, believe it or not, mosquito control, the police office of secondary employment, and I think a few others, and my office, NOSEP. And so he provides more policy level and budgetary type guidance to us about, obtaining the objectives of the administration, and essentially, he works with us to kind of develop our what our priorities are, and he works with us a lot with the CAO's office to discuss budget matters, what our budget requests are going to be on a year-to-year basis. A good example, I guess, would be January 1st, where, and actually the snow event that occurred after, where we had a lot of expenditures outside of what was budgeted for this year because of the response to both. And so navigating those types of challenges, both with the policy and the budget of dealing with those types of things, he assists with. And so I report directly to him. But, one thing that I've always been very pleased with this mayor and this administration is that we meet pretty much on a weekly basis on
Really?
Mondays with the mayor, and we're able to have an open dialogue with the mayor, which I think is not in my experience, is not common. And that's specifically with public safety, and that's specifically with, also Joe Threat. Some of our infrastructure folks are there as well. So we're really able to actually, as a smaller leadership team, coordinate and discuss a lot of the things that come up on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis in the city.
And can you just describe briefly for our listeners, like you've touched on snow, flooding, hurricanes, human trafficking, Super Bowl, Mardi Gras, a little of everything. But can you just give us an idea of what all hazards planning might be on a daily basis?
So like I said, I get requests a lot of the time. We'll get a public records request for the city's hurricane plan. And we don't have a hurricane plan. We have a city comprehensive emergency operations plan, because when you plan for all hazards, there is no specific disaster. These things they don't occur. These aren't solitary occurrences. What happens during a major special event, as I kind of said before, is a lot of the same resources and a lot of the same people you need for the response to a hurricane. Now, we have hurricane-specific plans like the City Assisted Evacuation, like the City Emergency Resource Center plan, and a lot of those things that we can activate. But when you're talking about day-to-day city operations, there's a lot of different things that can affect both the community and city government and continuity of government. I would say that, and one of the roles of my office is every year we do the city's threat and risk assessment, and it's called a THIRA. And so we actually sit down with all of our public safety partners, with our infrastructure partners, with the health department and others, essentially some of the essential services that the city provides. And we just discuss and talk about capabilities and what capabilities we have and what type of threats are the biggest threats to the city. And by far, our number one, and recognized by the federal government, state government, and city government on down, our number one threat to this city is weather, okay, particularly hurricanes and actually flooding. And so that's something that, drives kind of what our priorities and what our emphasis is in how we respond to a lot of these things. Now, second and third behind that would be civil disturbance, like a terrorist attack, because we are a city that's kind of built on tourism and visitors, and anything that affects that, could be extremely detrimental to the community, as we've seen. And then third would be some sort of man-made disaster or infrastructure or hazardous materials release. And that's because we're a port city. We have a lot of trucking, shipping, rail, moving in and out of the city that have a lot, the river carries a lot of things that are, can be somewhat dangerous. And so that is another planning effort that we do, is to maximize what kind of sensors we have as far as sensing chemical equipment and different things like that, and what type of response plans we have for, say, a major type of hazardous materials release.
Well, I have to say, all of those things that might keep our listeners up at night worried, that's just what you have to do every single day.
That's it.
Okay, cool. So you are basically the director of our nightmares.
Pretty much.
Okay,
yeah.
Got it.
We had a softball team back years ago. The city had a softball league with city departments, and NOSEPs had a softball team. We were not good, but we were the bad news bearers.
Oh. Wow.
Yeah,
that is actually
you
spot
are.
on.
You are. That is perfect. I mean, you have definitely highlighted.
Typically, when you get a phone call from me, it's probably there's
not good.
People answer like,
What's going on?
hello.
Yeah. Yeah, they're talking to you on a really bad day.
Yeah.
Well, considering also, Colin, that you pretty much you're the supervisor of all these people, all these agencies in layman's terms, that basically get them ready for what may happen in emergencies or anything that may happen in New Orleans. How do you efficiently coordinate with all these agencies across the board during an emergency?
So we have, we follow what's called the National Incident Management System, or NIMS. NIMS is something that was developed by FEMA. It really started in the 70s on the West Coast with wildfires, and so as we all know, and we've seen unfortunately this year, wildfires in California, Arizona, and Nevada, and those western states, they become very large, and all of a sudden you're dealing not just with one city or one county that has a fire. You're dealing with multiple cities, multiple counties, and sometimes multiple states that are all involved in fighting the same fire. And so in the 70s, it was actually this actually came from fire, from what I would call fire science and not necessarily law enforcement, that you needed to have a system that addressed what we call rapidly expanding incidents, where something starts in the city of New Orleans as a house fire, and then all of a sudden expands and is in Jefferson Parish and maybe occurring in Plaquemines Parish or St. Bernard, and starts to get larger and larger. You start to run out of resources at the local level. So then you need an ability to reach out and get a hold of neighboring parishes, get a hold of neighboring cities, get a hold of the state, and then ultimately at the top level, the federal government, who has a tremendous reach. You have to be able to have a system that puts that together. And so what we practice with that, with NIMS, the National Incident Management System, is the ability to bring people together. And we do that at City Hall on the 9th floor in the city's Emergency Operations Center. And so we have a facility up there. Happy to have you all come up and see it if you haven't been before. But we have a facility there where we can put people face to face, because what we found is, although technology has gotten a lot better, having people remote and trying to make these types of decisions, especially when you're making very serious decisions that are going to affect lives and that need your political leadership involved to make the proper objectives and choices, to give them the information, you need to have everyone in one room. And so that's what the Emergency Operations Center provides. So I've given a little bit of the background on it, but the long story short is, by having state, local, and federal representation in one room at City Hall before, during, and after a disaster, we're able to make decisions and provide information to the public that keeps people safe and hopefully ultimately down the road gets them on the road to recovery. We never see full recovery from these disasters, particularly vulnerable communities. But what we do see is at least getting back to what we call normal. And that's the least we can hope for, is to get back to there.
So you mentioned our vulnerable communities, and you've mentioned community a couple times. Can you talk to us about how your department or how you engage with the community in structuring all of these plans and ensuring that their input and their concerns are being addressed, so that way, when there is, one of these emergencies, they're bought into and they trust the infrastructure and the model and the plan that you're bringing them?
Yeah, I mean, one word, or it's actually kind of two words, NOLA Ready. That is our disaster preparedness kind of brand, but it's more than that. It's the yellow caution sign with the hurricane swirl in it, and it's what everyone knows from the alerts and from the website and from social media. And I encourage everyone to follow us at NOLA Ready. Our website's ready.nola.gov. And right now on your phone, text NOLA Ready, one word, to 77295. And we'll cover this again, obviously, towards the end. But that's a way to immediately get alerts from us regarding everything we're talking about today: weather, special events, traffic, parades, anything that comes up, we send out alerts. And it's a small team, but the other side of NOLA Ready that maybe people aren't as familiar with is our volunteer engagement and our community engagement side. I've got full-time employees that run the NOLA Ready Volunteer Corps, which trains thousands of people in the community to assist us in disasters, particularly after disasters when we need people the most, to try and help, run emergency resource centers, just be a friendly face, hand out water, hand out ice, hand out food, just be that comforting person at a rec center after a hurricane when we have people that, maybe don't have power and are stressed out and hot and tired. And so we have this NOLA Ready Volunteer Corps that assists us with that. They also assist us with registering people for evacuation, should that become necessary. It's just it's what we call a force multiplier, meaning that, we're never going to have enough. We're never going to have enough police officers, firefighters, paramedics. They're always, they all have very important roles and jobs that they do during disasters. So anything that we can do to bring in extra added support to assist the community, whether it be through our own reserve employee program, whether it be through bringing in volunteers, whether it be coordinating and bringing in potentially disaster teams from other communities and other states, which we both bring in. And I'm very proud to say, extremely proud that, my office coordinates a team here in the city that has traveled to other disasters in other states and communities and been able to pass on a lot of that, what lessons learned, real hard lessons that the city has learned. And we're able to actually go to other communities and assist them in their time of need, paying it forward, which is very important to me and very important to my office. But the other side, again, of NOLA Ready is community engagement. And to your question, Stella, we have a community manager, community engagement manager that actually goes out and deals with many of the NGOs, nonprofits, community groups, houses of worship, business groups, neighborhood associations, and brings them all together on a semi-regular basis during kind of what we call blue skies, where there's not a lot going on when needed. But then during a disaster, daily conference calls, emails, sharing information, collecting resources, because what we have found is that the NGO community, the nonprofit community, and houses of worship are extremely nimble after disaster in getting immediate care and help out to the community. The problem is that they burn out quickly as fast as they get started. And it makes sense. I mean, they're typically operating on a shoestring budget. They're dealing, again, with volunteer folks who have to get their lives in order as well and get back to what we call normal. So what we've done at NOSEP and with NOLA Ready is tried to envision and put together, how can we backstop those NGOs, those community groups, those houses of worship, provide them, look, if they can still go for another week of handing out water to people that need it, I'll give them the water if they run out. That's helping everyone. And so that's a huge part of it. That's also how we work with the community to kind of inform our plans as well. So when we're looking at doing a big change to a plan, or we're looking at maybe developing some sort of new response plan, what we do is utilize that community engagement through NOLA Ready to bring people together either in person. Sometimes we do it electronically. Sometimes we do surveys. Sometimes we just poll social media. It all depends on what type of input is needed and what we're looking for. But ultimately, that's how we get out to the community when we're developing a lot of these plans.
That is wonderful to hear. We know, and you've done a good job of highlighting that disasters don't impact everyone equally, and that some of our communities are going to have a very difficult time recovering from disasters. And so we're very happy to hear that you're thinking about all of these different things and how we serve the community and plan for these moments. So can you just clarify, how do you think about like language access or transportation or people with limited resources when you're planning for hurricanes or evacuations?
Right. So we have, we're one of the first cities in the country and first emergency management offices in the country to hire a functional and access needs coordinator. So I have a full-time employee, and I'm really appreciative to the mayor, to the city council, and to the health department, because this was a project that we put together a few years ago, really after Hurricane Ida. Ida was a big lesson for us in a lot of ways, particularly with vulnerability of the elderly and those with medical conditions, those that are dependent on electricity because we were out of electricity for so long, and those with access needs, particularly language. And so I have an employee now, 24, full-time employee, that her entire role is to take our plans, look at what's existing, and suggest and make adaptations to those plans to make sure that we're dealing with functional and access needs. And then any new plan we develop, she is intrinsically tied with the community, the deaf community,
Wonderful.
language, language access community, and deals with a lot of our translation services and how we are able to put together those things to make sure that that we're prepared from a language standpoint as well. And I would add that I said text NOLA ready to 77295. That's in English. If you text ESP to 77295, you'll receive all of our alerts that we put out in English in Spanish.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That's awesome.
And we're working on Vietnamese, but there is a disconnect nationally with the services that we use to provide these alerts with the importance of the Vietnamese language. I'll just say that bluntly. It's not as well used in other communities in the country as it is here in New Orleans and some of the other Gulf Coast regions. So we continue to, I can do for major events and major incidents, I literally have someone to do verbatim translation on the spot, but I don't have the service that does the automatic translation for Vietnamese yet, but we'll get it eventually.
Got it. So, Colin, as we mentioned already, it's hurricane season and it started on June 1st. So for residents and people that are from here are understandably anxious sometimes when the season approaches, what should residents know right now to prepare for that?
And can I throw in people that are uniquely anxious just because also of national changes to say FEMA or different news stories about how things are changing in hurricane tracking or whatever. So if you could just answer that huge question and tell us how to be less anxious going into this season.
Well,
with everything that's happening.
Look, there is a lot of unknown out there right now, and unfortunately, when you have unknowns, you start to get interpretations and what I'll call misinformation.
Yes.
I'm not exactly clear on what is misinformation or disinformation. I think it's misinformation about what's going on, particularly at the city level. I'm just going to say this to at least calm nerves. There are no changes to FEMA for this hurricane season, 2025.
Okay.
That is for sure, from what we have been told. Now, there is discussion out there about changing FEMA, about getting rid of FEMA, about those other types of things. And I'll just say that we have been very clear from the mayor herself and from the city administration that, we believe that FEMA has a place in this country and is necessary. If there are changes to be made to FEMA, which look, there can always be changes to federal bureaucracy. I believe that the city has a vested interest in knowing ahead of time what those changes are going to be. And so we stay engaged. And look, I'll say the state is engaged in making sure that we understand what's coming next. And when I say next, I mean after this hurricane season. Fortunately, I think for Louisiana, the president put together this FEMA Advisory Council. We have both our governor and a previous director of GOSEP, who is a very sharp emergency manager, Mark Cooper, are both on that committee. They'll be able to have their voices heard. We have met with our state representation on this committee and I have voiced for New Orleans what our concerns were. I will just tell you I have concerns about presidential disaster declarations.
Can you explain what those are?
So what happens is, and this is particularly important for a hurricane, disasters come out of nowhere. A tornado hits. Usually you've got minutes, if that, to prepare for a tornado. So what will happen is the tornado hits, there's a response, people are injured, property is damaged, both personal property, property of the community, and then also government properties, city buildings, county buildings, parish buildings, however you want to put it together. There's categories of damage for everything that occurs. If you go out immediately, which we do as a city, and you take your damage to public property like city buildings, and then you take your damage to businesses and homes, and you take your damage to people as far as income, potentially injuries, fatalities, those types of things, you put all that together and you come up with a number that is your disaster threshold. Once that threshold is established, you put in a request for a presidential or a federal disaster declaration. What that does is that opens up what's called the Stafford Act, which is a federal act that was created in the 1980s to address the reimbursement of damages for a major disaster. Our last Stafford Act declaration was for Francine.
I was going to ask, when was the last time we received that?
Well, that was our last hurricane disaster declaration. We have requested a federal declaration for the January 1st terrorist attack as well, and that's still in process. But for the major, when we're talking about hurricane season, since that was the question, those disaster declarations are incredibly important to a community, both at the city level and I would say at the state level, because I've heard some things about like states should be able to handle these disasters alone.
Right.
I don't know of a state that can. When you're talking about something like a Katrina, when you're talking about something like the flooding that was and tornadoes that they just had in Arkansas, the tornado that they had in St. Louis, talking about $5 billion worth of damage.
Right.
And then I think the largest example this year, when you're talking about the Pacific Palisades fire in Los Angeles, there is no community that can afford to absorb all of these damages, the monetary amount in particular. And so, having that resource is huge. One thing I'll add on to that is that when we know a hurricane's coming, because sometimes we'll have a few days to prepare for it, if we, the problem is a lot of the storms we're seeing and have seen over the past several years have been a blip on the radar, and then 24 hours later, they're a Category 4 hurricane.
Yeah, they're rapidly progressing.
And that gives us less time to prepare. So one of the things that is kind of carved out in the federal government is that you can do what's called a pre-landfall declaration. And so what we do very quickly is we declare a disaster at the local level. The governor declares a disaster at the state level, because the governor is looking at not just Orleans Parish or the city of New Orleans, but looking at Jefferson, Plaquemine, St. Bernard, all the way over to, Calcasieu Parish, Cameron Parish, the, Lafourche, Terrebonne. All of those areas towards the coast are going to be potentially impacted by this. And then, as we've seen by other storms, even as the hurricane dissipates and moves up through the central and north Louisiana, there's tornadoes, there's death, there's destruction, and river flooding in a lot of those areas north of the city. So the state looks at it from that perspective, from parish to parish. We apply for these pre-disaster or pre-landfall declarations because there's a lot of preparation that goes into getting ready, potentially an evacuation, stocking, sheltering, emergency resource centers, and then just the amount of overtime and money that it takes to prepare your public safety. Every firefighter's working, every police officer's working, every paramedic's working, in order to be ready for the response and the preparation, response, and recovery to the storm. So, knowing that you have a pre-landfall declaration means that those certain what we call emergency expenses are going to be at least reimbursable. The challenge right now, what I'm seeing is, are we going to get those pre-landfall declarations? Because if we don't, that's a problem.
Okay.
And just to follow up on that, though, Colin, but even if it's not a pre-landfall declaration that you're seeking and you do the normal presidential disaster declaration, it gets denied. So what happens then?
Look, I've had conversations about this with the administration, with the mayor herself. Mayor's like, it doesn't matter. We're going to spend what we need to do what we need to do to make sure the people in our city are safe. That's not a question.
Okay.
Where it becomes an issue, though, is, we talk about money and I understand that there may be waste, fraud, abuse out there and things like that. And let's not, I don't want everyone to think money is the only thing. Our most valuable thing that we have is people.
Yes.
And if we don't have enough people, and this is where the whole idea about FEMA going away concerns me, for preparedness and response, we have a very, very capable public safety team here in the city. We can get through hurricanes. We've done it before. I'm not as concerned about FEMA not being here before the storm. FEMA's expertise has always been after the storm, the recovery. They bring in hundreds of people. They bring in project managers and folks that come in and go door to door and make sure to address a lot of these, damage to property, individual assistance. They set up the disaster recovery centers. They bring in the Small Business Administration and do the disaster loans, which is a huge program that really helps people that maybe are in a gap between their insurance and what their actual damage is, and they don't qualify for FEMA, outright for disaster funds. That's a huge amount of people, and I voiced this to the folks that are going and talking about the future of FEMA. I know of nowhere in the city or the state that has those types of people or resources on hand to do that. Financially, you can't have someone working for you full time, this cadre of people that only shows up when there's in the recovery to a disaster. That's why we have these national teams, because while they're helping people in California right now recover from the wildfires, or helping people in Arkansas recover from the flooding and the tornadoes, when we have our time of need in the summer, in the late summer between August and October, those teams will be ready to come in and help us. And that's why you need to have, because if you have the national teams, they're able to respond nationally wherever there's a disaster in the country, whether it be in the Northwest, the Northeast, the Southwest, the Southeast. And that would be the fundamental thing that I think is not being, or at least to my knowledge, is not being discussed about what the future of FEMA is. It's the money is one thing. It's the people. It's the services
right,
that make the difference. That is the biggest thing that we will miss if that was to say go away. But again, to the original question, sorry, I talk a lot. No changes this year. We're operating. I've got the same phone numbers in my phone for the same people at FEMA that are still working. They're ready to go. We've had our meetings. We've met with the state. I don't see any difference this year as in previous years, but it does bear repeating that in future years, I'm interested to see where this goes. We're going to do whatever we can to do what we have to do to make sure our community is safe.
So in our final moments, I would love to hear how you have worked with NOPD to prepare for this year's hurricane season.
Yeah, we just recently had our mayor's briefing, which is kind of an opportunity where all the department heads, including NOPD, Chief Kirkpatrick was there and her executive staff, are able to sit down and discuss what the priorities are, which obviously between hurricane seasons, they don't change a whole lot, although we did discuss kind of some of the things going on at the federal level and concerns about that. We're also able to kind of game out to what we call tabletop certain, scenarios and different things that could occur and how we would respond to those. I think the most important part of it, though, is it's an opportunity for each of these department heads to show how they're ready. And they sit there and they brief the mayor on the screen with a microphone and really identify anything that they're behind on, or that they have challenges with, or that are something that has not been addressed. And the mayor is really big on, she says after the fact, later for that. And she means that. And I've seen it in action. Like, she wants to know about stuff. They want to address things before they become a problem. And she has no patience. This may be surprising. She has no patience to come up to her after something has happened and said, "Oh, I didn't say anything about it," or, I guess I should have brought this up earlier. So that's something that, NOPD participated in. NOPD, to Chief Kirkpatrick's credit, because I hadn't seen it done in a few years, actually sat her own team down and invited us to come in and assist with a tabletop exercise, just focusing on what NOPD's role is in a hurricane.
Interesting.
And that was tremendous, because one thing about some of these public safety agencies, the police department in particular, is roles change.
Mm. Can you tell the public what you mean by that?
Right.
So the police is not necessarily out there arresting people during Hurricane Ida. It's not about that necessarily. Their role changes, as in, what do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, roles change in a couple of different ways. First of all, what a particularly a police manager, say a lieutenant, a captain, or above, what their job was for hurricane season, or their responsibility was last year, may not be the same this year.
Interesting.
They could get transferred, they can get promoted, and all of a sudden they're in a new role. And so it's nice to have the continuity of being able to sit down and be able to tabletop out and workshop how, if this happens, what are you going to do in your new role? But actually, to your point, and I think it's very valid, is, anti-crime and anti-looting, those types of operations typically occur after the storm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But there's a whole portion front loaded on the front end of the storm, which I was really happy to see NOPD do this year with this tabletop, of talking about how do we provide traffic security for the city assisted evacuation? How are we going to do security if we have to do emergency resource centers at all of our at our NORD facilities? How does the convention center play into this? Because we're doing some plans for vulnerable communities for refuge in case we run out of time and we need to put people somewhere quickly in a safe place until the storm passes, and then we can get them out after. They're fully on board with that and talked about that discussion. So there's a lot of things that the police do in order to facilitate evacuation, in order to try and keep people safe before the storm. And then what a lot of people don't know is, after the storm, part of NOPD's role, along with the fire department and EMS, is to quickly go out and do what we call preliminary damage assessments, where we want them to actually go out, and we have tablets for them and everything, where they go out and actually document damage to, and the police focus particularly on, closed roads, the things that they know, traffic, they secure buildings, banks, pharmacies, as part of that kind of anti-looting, and where they need to start securing neighborhoods and buildings and people's homes to the best of their ability. They're able to actually show us where the damage is the most, so we can start getting resources in there to clear the roads, get the street lights turned on, and all those other things. So there's a lot of responsibility within public safety. And by the way, they save lives. Like when people drive into floodwaters and do all of those crazy things that they shouldn't do, they're out there as well. And so, I have a lot of respect for them, but, every time we get together with our public safety partners, police, fire, EMS, they constantly impress me with how hard they work and how seriously they take the job. And so what we try to do at NOSEP is give them a good plan to kind of bond around and take a lot of the guesswork out of how things should happen. And then, we're the people that feed them. We're the people that house them. We meet every year with several different facilities around the city, particularly hospitals and the convention center and other large facilities that you can probably imagine, because if we do have to go to a situation where we need places for our public safety and essential employees to sleep and eat, we have agreements for that with different facilities, hospitals, the convention center, and others. And so they're geographically located around the city. We call them task force sites. We maintain those agreements, and hopefully we don't have to use them, but we have our number one role or goal and role is to take care of our public safety so they can get out there and take care of the community.
I love our job is to have a good plan for everyone to bond around.
Yeah.
I think that is really important to just underscore. And do you mind saying all of the different phone numbers again? What should people text to be able to get NOLA ready?
First of all,
alerts?
everything I've talked about today, you can find at ready.nola.gov and more. There's, you can actually click on links for every, hate the doom and gloom, but it's kind of comes with the job. Every different type of disaster, special event, all those different types of things, you can actually click on them. And it'll give you, real, preparedness tips and things to look at and how to prepare. Our hurricane section is massive. It's got a lot of information. It's a lot of the stuff that, quite frankly, most people in our community already know because we've been through this stuff so many times. And I would be remiss to say, I so appreciate this community because when it snows, we ask them to stay home. When it floods, we ask them to stay home, stay off the roads. Whatever we ask our community to do, and particularly through NOLA Ready, they do it. And I'm immensely appreciative of that because if people just go off and do their own thing and don't pay attention, that's when you start getting loss of life and people get in bad situations. And for the most part, the occasional driver that drives in an underpass, I get it. But for the most part, when we tell people look, the rest of this week, it's probably going to be flooding, hurricane, tropical storm type stuff. Business is closed, people stay home, people are prepared. And so you can find that at ready.nola.gov. We're on all the social media platforms at NOLA Ready. And then I'll say it again. If you want to get real-time alerts to any device, text NOLA Ready, that's NOLAREADY, NOLA Ready, one word, to 77295, and you'll get those alerts. We amplify weather service alerts. No, we're not the cause of that really loud, annoying thing in the phone. That's actually the weather service themselves. But sometimes what we'll do is, we certainly amplify their messaging, but what we'll also do is sometimes send out an additional message to kind of add context. Mm-hmm. Sometimes their messages are a little, a little technical.
Yeah.
And maybe just a little bit blunt. Yeah. We try to craft hey, this is what you just received. This is what it means. Also, our website, we explain a lot of those things, the differences between watches and warnings and what flood advisories mean and all those types of things. And we also, obviously, my office is responsible for the neutral ground parking restrictions. So when we lift those, we put those out through our text alerts as well. So again, NOLA Ready, one word, to 77295. If you would like to receive those in Spanish, it's ESP to 77295.
Okay. And really quickly, I know we're running out of time, but I just also wanted to flag, because you talked about community and how important numbers are. How do they volunteer if they do want to volunteer?
Go to ready.nola.gov. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a great point. Ready.nola.gov also has volunteering. Our office is very heavily invested. We're right by Xavier here in internships. So if you have someone who's interested in any type of disaster preparedness work, disaster management, emergency management, social work, we love our interns, particularly for NOLA Ready. You can sign up for an internship. You can sign up to be a volunteer. You can also sign up to have someone come and present to you. If you want to have one of our folks, it could even be me, come and present to you on disaster preparedness, hurricane preparedness. We team with the health department and New Orleans EMS to do stop the bleed tourniquet training. We do hands-only CPR. We work with NOPD and the FBI to offer active shooter preparedness and prevention training. That's very popular with businesses and with houses of worship. We've trained a bunch. We do psychological first aid and several other trainings on there that are all free, and you can sign up on the website, and we're happy to come out to the community and offer those trainings. And thank you to our partners who offer that as well.
Well, thank you so much, Colin, and especially, again, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you giving our listeners all this information that they can use, and this, is
So
the
much
most useful.
information. So
Right.
much information.
Well, that wraps up today's episode of Monitors Mike, and I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all our listeners for tuning in and staying engaged with the crucial conversations we're having about police oversight and community safety and public safety today. Thank you so much, Colin Arnold from the New Orleans Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, for joining us today on the Monitors Mic. We appreciate you sharing your experiences and lessons learned through your work in public safety in New Orleans. We thank you for all that you have done. If any of you out there have missed any part of today's show or want to catch up on past episodes, visit our website at www.nolaipm.gov. You can follow us and find us on YouTube at NOLA IPM, and you can also follow us on social media for updates and news. On Instagram, we're NOLA OIPM, and on Facebook, we're New Orleans Independent Police Monitor. Until next time, stay informed, stay involved, and stay committed to building a safer community. And this has been the Monitors Mic.